Oh no, that's not it.
Live streaming is on.
Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is June 21, 2021. Thank you so much to Clinton Ignatoff. You are the best, dude. Thanks for all your help. He'll be back. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Richard Altman. Hey, Richard, how's it going?
Oh, good, Jerry. And I'm working on getting my video shared. I really apologize.
Oh, well, don't apologize. You got a great YouTube channel called McLuhan Videos. But let's talk the questions here. First, the question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
Well, health, obviously.
Okay. And what is your favorite? Yeah, what's your favorite form of information? How information comes into you?
Dialogue, conversation, face to face.
Oh, I love that. We call that,
that's the best way.
yeah, we call that direct experience. And we've been able to share that sometimes. So, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Oh, that's a good one. Probably curiosity, simultaneous with survival.
Very good. Now, do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
Both, because I think what might seem invented was actually innate, and that overall it's innate.
You know, that's funny because we rarely go off the script of the questions, but we got a new one talking to this great YouTuber called John David Ebert yesterday or a couple days ago, and we added this one due to the brilliant Clinton. What is information?
Well, I mean, it's knowing in the traditional sense, like observing, like a child mimicking its surroundings and doing so or motivated to do so based on, it's hard to say, but I think ideas come to people quite early, and when something is appealing, or maybe just the novelty of comprehension, like speaking from the point of view of a child, when, let's say, they see, put it this way, here's an even better example. I was having some breakfast for dinner, and I gave a tiny little piece of a sausage to my dog, and I made sure to take the skin off the sausage and just have just the meat, a little bit of meat, because you can't give too much because it's an older dog. But then right as the dog took it from my hand, the other dog saw that one moment. The other dog was distracted drinking water from the dog bowl, and we were very quiet because I don't like to feed the other dog just because I just don't like to feed it. It doesn't seem to keep the food down as easily. It's too voracious, and therefore it's too excitable, and then it ends up, vomiting. But right when the dog got it, the other dog saw it. And it's one of those types of things. I think all sort of like living things have that urge to mimic and gain some sense of understanding in order to begin the authorial process, like not authority, but I guess that's where the word comes from, but give it their own spin, so like the innate and invent, it's constantly happening, like on depending on the proportioned ratio perspective, from nano to mechanical human scale. It's the same overarching pattern, regardless of the perspective. It's like, how can I do it? Can I do it as well as I've seen? And can I improve on that? And what is an improvement in retrospect?
Wow, Richard, that was really articulate. Why did humans invent language?
probably at the very core to provide proof in the form of some kind of record. Now, with oral, you have songs and dances, which could be languages. And then once we get into marking, like a rock marking against a rock, and, you know, as bros called it, time binding. Once you, that's like, you know, curvilinear hieroglyphs, etc. That was a little more, had a little longer, well, it has a longer life than a dance. I mean, a dance can be taught, but you're always there. You know, even if you pass it on to another generation, there's always got to be an observer. Whereas time-bound information has more of a specific psychic characteristic, because you don't know who's observing something that you have, you know, marked in a cave, or is collecting dust on a shelf somewhere. Let's say like that Venice Cinema, I got a used magazine. Who's the last person that touched that magazine before I bought it, you know? And then like the dust, what led up to the pattern of the dust on the magazine, and each particle having a bit of energy imbued in its, you know, activity, in its history, which brings us obviously to the blockchain and an immutable ledger.
Wow, that was good. Now, you mentioned a name back there. I just want to make it clear. Time binding came from William Burroughs?
Yeah, I remember it from him, probably in that little black and white square book that he wrote called Electronic Revolution.
All right. Okay, so Lily Tomlin said we humans invented language to complain. What's the difference between complaining, and critical thinking?
Probably the amount of money that you could get from patrons / government entities in order to prove the difference between complaining and I forget the rest of your question, but
critical thinking.
Yeah, exactly. The difference between complaining and critical thinking, you can really only measure by how much money you get for the jargon used to define exactly the same thing.
That was good. I didn't say the part that I usually add is that I've heard that if you complain and you gossip, you live longer.
I've heard he or she who laughs lasts.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Well, Bob says the best, when you're laughing, you're learning.
Yeah. It truly is the best medicine for sure.
Yeah. And it's out of Gurdjieff saying laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no.
Well, so we've touched on the interval, the bardo, the gap, and of course, McLuhan's favorite, resonating, the chemical bond being resonating interval between two separate, you know, objects.
Yeah.
It's all about that. It's all about the resonating interval, or laughter,
It is indeed. Now, I want to stay on our script, but we're going to go off on tangents often. So I appreciate your consistency here in thought and articulation, Richard. You said the word hieroglyphics, and Eric McLuhan said that tetrads are a cross between poetry and hieroglyphics. What does he mean by hieroglyphics there in that context?
Well, I guess the plus sign, or the way that it's depicted in Laws of Media, and how poetry is resonation. So I believe he stressed that there was no order in which to interpret a tetrad. The traditional way it's depicted, the sort of plus sign with 4 segments being used for enhance, reverse, retrieve, and I think obsolesce, or I forget. It's an enhance, reverse, and flip. Is it reverse and flip that they interchange?
No, it's retrieve. So it's enhance, obsolete, retrieve, and reverse, or flip. Reverse and flip are the same.
I think, yeah, hieroglyphics are iconic, you know, ideogram ideogrammatic and simultaneous, showing a relationship with figure ground, as opposed to letter or phonemes and morphemes, which are, I think, a morpheme in and of itself is a word, obviously with many simultaneous interpretations, and then a phoneme is technically useless in that it's just the sound making up the component of the morpheme. So poetic hieroglyphs is like, poetry resonating on meaning and, using space between words to show their connection. I think that's what he means, is that like you have to sort of, they catalyze reflection almost immediately because of the way that they appear on the page. It's non-linear inside a linear, traditionally linear medium of a printed page.
That was good, Richard, man. You are good. Okay, I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
Hear the problem. You could say, I don't know what I think until I say it out loud or write it down, or but for me personally, I don't know what I think until I begin making something.
Nice.
I mean, a lot of times it's just like falling into the work habit of, for me, video editing. If I don't know what to do that day, or if I want to sort of like ground myself in some type of productive sort of gesture, I know I can always work on, fire up Final Cut Pro X and just finish something. And then at least, it's like those sort of self-help books, like by people like Tim Ferriss, who like quote like Army drill sergeants, who say like, if at the very least all you do is make your bed. Now, Tim Ferriss said this before he / it that cannot be named because of the fragile fascist demographic. But just open up a can of Coke. At the very least, you'll hear that sound from the tab. I mean, do something that kind of, materializes the nostalgia that you have in fact done something. So
man, that was good. I love it, Richard. I don't know what I think until I make something. That is a great answer. Okay, Richard, do thoughts create emotions?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I don't even know if you could say that one's not the same as the other.
Yeah. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Oh, that's a great one. I would say I pursue meaning, because that in and of itself, but you can't pursue it too quickly, I think, because sometimes like you bite off more than you can chew. But I think satisfying meaning imbues just the process, a feeling of some kind of happiness, whether it's conscious or unconscious. It's definitely what we're supposed to do, is pursue pattern recognition through meaning.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness?
Again,
I know it's both, and it depends, but I'm saying your hunch on the more part. I know, I mean, you can stick to your guns and say it's both. That's fine, but just your hunch, your intuition, does it do one of them more, create or detect?
Create conscious. So does the brain create consciousness or
detect it? Like, is consciousness there? Just is it just bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
Well, I mean, you have that that scientific notion of the observer affecting that which is observed. So in a way, again, you can't help but create and detect it, but I will put more emphasis on detection rather than creation.
Very good. What is faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Thought.
There's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. Thank you. Okay. Good. You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. That's the great poet Audre Lorde. Another great poet dancer, Yvonne Rainer, responded, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
New tool?
Yeah.
Oh, well, video editing again. I think video editing is what word processing was. Right now, let's say specifically since the most stable release of social media, mobile social media, there's been such a huge increase in word processing that at least, I mean, video editing formally understood in the way that we instinctively understand word processing is still, I would imagine it's not, we're not there yet. Like we're not at the equivalent amount of video editing understanding being at the level that we have for word processing. So the tool I would suggest would be more video editing rather than just passive video editing by way of simply just passive content creation, even if it is, no matter what type of genre the passive content creation is. I don't think people realize the amount of information that is available to understand in video editing as they understand it in word processing.
Wow, Richard, let's stay on that. I'm going to go off and ask you this one. I talked to Michael Apted about 40 years ago when MTV was first breaking. And I said, why do music video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? Marty Scorsese was editing his films faster because of MTV. He said that. Michael Apted said, because we've learned to take in information faster. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
I think that we can constantly take in information faster because we're, again, taking in more elaborate and refined patterns. Much more elaborate, much more refined. There are not words for the patterns that we're taking in. Whereas in word processing, you have to begin to look at the curvy linear aspect of the actual letters to even begin to get where you begin with video editing. I mean, the beginning of word process, the beginning of letters is where video editing begins, because you're literally taking the entire environment and then resonating off it. Where, just like the shape of the letter, now you're looking at the shape of the environment. And video is the last medium because you can't do the same thing in video that you can do. Letters can't include video, audio can't include video, but video can include letters and video can include audio.
Right.
Now the tactility and stuff is a little different, but there's more room to resonate. Just like by our talking right now, the environment that I'm in by being outside acts as a kind of, punctuation for the train of thoughts that we're on, whether or not they complete as linear as we instinctively want them to, because there's no outside distraction. The moment you get towards really, really, really truthful, delicate ideas, there's almost always some kind of outside distraction to keep you from perfecting that momentary understanding.
Wow. And you're coming through loud and clear. This sound is great. So one more question in that regard is it literally possible to multitask? I mean, is it for humans in general?
Um, I think the moment that you create more that you're able to competently complete, then obviously there's that much more that is now up to the or up for being needed to be completed. Like you can, like, you know, if you had more time, you would have made whatever you were making shorter, kind of thing. Like it's like we can see opportunities that we can't help but try to multitask in, and that will probably be what allows us to get better at doing it. So I guess yes, but it really depends on what the tasks being attempted simultaneously are.
Yeah. So McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn how to cope with what we don't like about certain inventions. So he says, okay, we can turn to the artist to uncover these hidden psychic effects, but we still ignore them. Why do humans still ignore the hidden psychic effects, even though we can turn to the artist to reveal them to us?
The system of the pace of the system on Earth doesn't necessarily seem to favor dealing with the ramifications that the artists are so acutely aware of when it comes to just the notion of progress. But as human scale, and you know, I used to say human scale, I mean mechanical scale, but as the mechanical scale dissolves and screen scale persists and evolves, the artists, well, that's kind of like the effect of the artist. You know, like everyone's going to have to deal with that, because if they don't, they're just going to get even more subsumed by the screen scale scape than they already are, and that's why you have so much emotional immaturity that's so distributed to everywhere right now. Maturity is like what William Gibson used to call the future. It's there, but it's just not evenly distributed. It's completely just an immature screenscape world, and the artist being ignored is just going to persist in that until it completely does a law of media reversal. As you can hear, there is quite a bit of distraction going on behind us, because this is obviously true.
That was brilliant. You brought up two great things. Richard, Bob used to tell me ambiguity is a sign of human maturity. Okay, here, what you really evoked in your statement there, or your percepts, were McLuhan in Explorations #7, Classroom Without Walls, 1957. It's misleading to suppose there's any basic difference between education and entertainment. This distinction merely relieves people of the responsibility of looking into the matter. It's like setting up a distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the grounds that one teaches and the other one pleases. However, it has always been true, whatever pleases teaches more effectively. What is he saying? You know, he's in the education business, but is he saying that entertainment teaches us more because it pleases?
Well, the last bit about how if it pleases, it teaches more effectively. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, he says, however, it's always been true, whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So
Right. Well,
I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
The simplistic notion of what pleases for a lot of people is merely just rudimentary empathy. Like you see someone that looks like you in a medium. Usually, you know, like if you see someone in any other medium outside of human scale. So any other medium outside of human scale. Human scale being everybody feels equal because they're sharing the ground at human scale. But the moment that somebody is encountering someone else that they empathize with in another medium, it pleases them because of the empathy. Now, are they being taught anything? Well, rudimentary emotion of the recognition of this sensation, whether it's dopamine or however you want to scientifically deconstruct it, the bottom line is people tend to gravitate towards those that are like-minded, but they don't have any objectivity about the process that's enabling that feeling. That's the problem. And that is the problem of today, is that nuance requires objectivity. And either it's one of three things, and I call it strategy or stupidity in a sphere of uncertainty. And what that means is, are these people who are causing, let's say, friction online through the tenets of cancel culture paid to do that? Or do they actually feel that way? And it's impossible to know where one ends and the other begins, because if they're paid, that's strategy. If they aren't paid, that's stupidity, because they're not objective enough to realize what's causing them to feel this way. And, there was a laugh just there. And so then in the sphere of uncertainty, it's like, that's where it's like the longer people ignore this, the worse it's like it's going to be far too late. Not too late, but they'll wish that they would have understood earlier because of the time wasted thinking it's one thing when it wasn't entirely as it appeared. And the last thing I'll say about an example was, online, it's very easy to kind of like get tricked. In fact, that's the whole purpose of the internet, at least for a few more generations, is to trick. And I remember reading a story once where it appeared in the normal channels of consumption. This is probably about 12 years ago, that a girlfriend like killed her boyfriend with her iPod because he accidentally erased all her songs. And from the way it was presented, it was like, well, if genius is limited and stupidity isn't, this could actually have happened. And then it was turned out to be a hoax. And I just thought to myself, well, I'm glad that I fell for that then, because at least I didn't fall for that later. And,
Wait,
that's just kind of like, yeah.
That was heavy. You mean literally they implied she took the iPad and punched him with it and killed him? Is that what you meant?
Not even an iPad, Gerry. Even older, an iPod, like before the iPhone.
Oh, right, but that was, you're saying that she used it as an instrument to kill. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you used a pencil to kill someone, you could use a pencil. Yeah. Okay. Now the hidden question here is sort of funny. You pay the same amount to go to a Faith No More concert and to a McLuhan lecture at an MEA conference. One's considered entertainment and one's considered education in the big picture.
Yeah.
Can you learn more from the Faith No More? Does that please you more, or suss that one out for me?
Well, I mean, I'll even go one further. I pay my bills by, working as a location production assistant. And what that means is I'll set up the tents and the toilets and, the garbages and do all the stuff that kind of like, is sort of like the ground, allowing the ground to exist for all the rest of the departments to be figure on, each circle being inside a circle until you get to the middle circle, which is, of course, the scene itself.
Yeah.
And so, when I do one, like a low budget movie for, let's say, I don't know, one of the two, like either like, one of these channels that just pump them out, they pump out like 40 movies a year and they're all like end on a happy note. So because they're only like 3 weeks, to me, I've always characterized it as like, it's like you're in the pit on a Thursday draft night at a punk show at like, let's say the Albert in Winnipeg, or the Mr. Bungle show was very much like the shows of my late 90s youth, where, it was just like the pit would start, and there'd be people kind of on the periphery of it, people in the middle, in the center of it, and then there'd be people that would be far away from it. But everyone was kind of like, affected by the energy of the band and stuff. And these movies were like that because they're so like, hey, they got to finish in 3 weeks. So it's just like, get in there and just do it, whatever. And there's a lot that you can learn when you understand, and you're just sort of like in that moment. It's like you dive into the water, you're swimming. You don't ask a person their point of view while swimming. They're committed to swimming. And that's really the same thing. It's like you commit to your overall rudimentary understanding of what you've committed to, and then the characteristics that spring up during the process of that commitment between it starting and finishing. Let's say starting at 0 and finishing at 100, and then it reassembles into the, you've done it, you've fulfilled the obligation that you've committed to. And so, yeah, anything complete is good, no matter what, whether it's a trip to the toilet or a movie. If you finished it correctly, it's amazing. And people don't commit enough and complete things enough. Everybody, they just don't complete enough. If they did, they'd have some sense of wanting to do something else, because it's such a great feeling to finish anything.
That was good, Richard. And it led perfectly into this, but one quickie anecdote. I think Andrew McLuhan was sort of a punk rocker. And one day, one concert he played, when it ended, he looked into the mosh pit and there was a copy of Understanding Media on the floor.
Well, you gotta wonder, is that you just gotta wonder, like,
how the heck that's Marshall's complex clairvoyance. But suss this one out. Here's another McLuhan line. I'd love to hear your layperson's. You're doing great because you're not talking in highbrow McLuhan secret language. You're talking down to earth. Thank you, Richard. Everybody experiences far more than they understand. Yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior. What did Marshall mean by that? What do you think he meant?
Well, again, I'll always go back to pattern recognition. If we experience more than we understand, then we are simply not aware of what we're experiencing. So if we have a varied palette of sensitive awareness, then the process that is outside of our immediate perspective can be felt. And if it's felt, then it can then be further refined and further commodified into building blocks for comprehension, personal subjective comprehension from our perspective, even if it's not technically, physically within our immediate milieu, including all our senses. So that's what I get from it, is like, it's kind of like you have to be aware while you're aware that there's that much that you're never going to be aware of. That asymptote idea that you can never touch the truth. You can always just circle around it forever, and you eventually just commit to the idea of knowing that you will never get the placebo of confirmation that so many people fall for, is these placebos of confirmation. And that's just so that it can continue to have room on the shelf for milk. The milk is fine probably 2 days to a week after its due date, but the limitation within the commitment of linear thinking at the art form mechanical scale, which is, the timestamp on the carton, and the carton that contains the milk or the soy milk or whatever, California Central sensitivity deems it's possible to consume that day, whatever the mark is at Erewhon, which means nowhere, which is in Calabasas, which is the basis for nowhere.
No, it means this. Richard, it means the ear one.
Right, and so it's not visible, so they can't believe it.
Right.
They can't believe it because they can't see it, and they don't feel it because that then puts them, that makes them mortal and puts them on the hook for actually having an opinion. And we all know that is not how it works out there. So so yeah, so I mean, like, we experience far more than we're aware of. I mean, yes, for everybody but Richard Altman. Yeah, that's how I think McLuhan probably meant it.
Very good. Are you more afraid of old ideas or more afraid of new ideas?
I am not really afraid of any idea, because if it has to be encountered, it will be, and that's it.
Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Yeah. I remember, like, they have to do with pop culture. Like, I remember having a 1966 Batman car and being at the grocery store and being at the cashier, and it was this mechanical lazy Susan that kind of brought the items around, and I put the car on there and held it and like let the wheels go. And I remember the cashier, a woman, telling me that, asking me if I ever saw the light go on the car, and I didn't know that there was a light on the car. And she said that's when Robin comes in. And in my mind, I really saw all that. Like, I saw that there would be maybe an opportunity for the light that never went on because it wouldn't go on. But at the time, I thought I maybe that it could go on because I was only like probably 5 or 6, and that little Robin would get into the car, like just like appear out of on the Lazy Susan in the grocery store. So it was like these ideas, or like, and then another quick one was that, like, when I was young, I used to think that if you farted outside and then went back to the spot that you farted a week later, that the fart would have traveled all the way around the world on that exact degree that you unleashed it on, and that if you went there at the right time, you'd be able to smell it again.
Ah, that is brilliant. I love. Okay, is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, it's a blessing.
Can you tell me someone within your immediate family who was a role model or had an impact on you, and just briefly, and what specifically was that impact?
I'd say my dad. He said this one line that I'll never forget, to try and be beyond reproach, which I think had an enormous influence on me for trying to anticipate all possible interpretation. I mean, usually within like a very expected context, but because of being left-handed and being a rambunctious young kid and stuff like that, I couldn't, like, my normal or my expected normal expectations were always like a little bit different. So to anticipate all possible ramifications for truly unique ideas was very helpful. I mean, ultimately very helpful.
That's a great. Okay, now outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you, and what was that impact?
Well, I'm not going to specifically say there was no specific person. Nothing specifically comes to mind except maybe like a teacher named Sheldon Oberman in grade 10. Just for being a teacher that wasn't so strict and actually seemed to be an artist in his own right before I really understood what that meant or why that was important. And you know what? It was because he actually had a sense of humor for me, and I always felt like, I always was like unintentionally didn't mean to take it too far, but I always seemed to like take things too far. And I was still me, and he never really made me feel like I was going too far. Not that I was trying to go too far, but he didn't freak out. I didn't mystify him, and that was nice at that age to be myself and not mystify someone in a negative way where they would just relegate you to a sort of like confusion
Yeah.
box.
Well put, dude. That was good. And did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yeah, I mean, like, sort of like neoconservative Jew, like not Orthodox, but not Reform.
Did you
But
check it? Are you still practicing, or did you check out?
oh yeah, no, I mean, like, like from, like similar, let's say, not similar, but like, I like to think that McLuhan sort of like looked at religion as the technology that it is, and that respecting the form, the medium of it, in addition to just not just blind reverence based on the name of it or the brand, but actually appreciating it and also trying to understand the form of it, not necessarily the translator as a traitor element of all religion, but the notion of anything with a history you have to kind of respect, even if it's just like like a rock. Anything that has like a history that can be traced deserves some kind of respect, for better or worse, just because it's still there. And so
Well,
religion is no different in that sense.
that was well put, Richard. I appreciate that. Do you pray?
Yeah, but I look at it more so just like I don't have like a ritualistic discipline, or I don't have a template in terms of how. I look at it more just like as an ongoing dialogue, that's like like I know, it's like I know where I'm thinking of it being directed at, but I don't like, you know, silently in my mind, put the letter in an envelope and label it with a
Yeah.
stamp. I just have like a kind of an ongoing dialogue that I've sort of had going since I became aware of thinking like on those along those lines.
It's like Peter O'Toole in the movie The Ruling Class. He thinks he's God, and he goes, "I knew I was God because every time I prayed, I found out I was talking to myself."
Yeah, I mean, like like that kind of idea, but it always that's like those ideas, like that notion is true, but then it goes back to the idea of like what's what's resonating,
Yeah,
where does if it never really, if the ripples never end, like it's like
yeah.
the moment you find out, all of a sudden it's the asymptote again.
Um, if God exists, what do you want God to tell you after you die?
Hmm. Um, Sort of like time editing, I guess.
Okay. So, do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Um, yeah, I think it's the latter. I think that part of everything, is like it's like the drugs. It's not the drugs' fault. It's not a gun's fault. It's not even evil's fault. But all those things have to kind of exist. And if you don't respect them, uh, and you by that you don't respect yourself, it will just use you, and you'll either let it because you don't respect yourself, or it will happen because you don't respect it.
Wow, that's good. This is interesting because the next question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'm going to set up with the few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini said, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, Richard, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Um, well, that's complicated because depending on the situation, but I would tend to agree that enemy or even just a negative influence being contemplated more than it deserves gives it more energy and thus changes potentially what it is. So you really have to know why. Motives are so important. Knowing why we do, why we're motivated to do what we do. And yeah, if you can identify things that are trying to just disrupt for the sake of disruption without any consideration, yeah, it's best to sort of allow that phenomena to flame out in its own sort of way, where its existence is its own punishment, and it'll just disintegrate.
Yep. James Joyce would thank you. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin over 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?"
Well, sometimes it's not always convenient to get that experience within the immediate sense. Like, you can't always go to where all the experiences that you see projected, whether it's light on like a projector or light through like television or any light emitting device, you can't always just get that immediate tactility inherent in the immediate experience. And if only for that idea, that again, the motivation as to why are you consuming what you're consuming, that could be the reason. The notion of a tree, well, trees are everywhere, but I mean, if it's like some sort of dreamlike environment, either a dream itself or the future virtual environments that we will be inhabiting a lot more. Each context has its own services and disservices, and so it's not always possible to simply go and experience that which is being depicted in some type of technological form.
Yeah. Now, Richard, I've shown your films and watched them, and I really appreciate what you've done with editing and filmmaking. Walk us through how you consumed and learned of films. You're a kid. Are you going to see VHS or cable or DVDs or in the movie theater? And then what film like kicked you over and goes, well, I can do that? Just sort of walk us through your attraction to pursue filmmaking.
Okay. I think because film draws in people who don't really feel like committing to anything else. Like, you don't want to, commit to, like, let's say, the three careers offered by any university, science, accounting, or business. And art on its own in a university environment tends to be geared towards just becoming a professor. So if you have like some experiences in your life that you've actually remembered and you feel that, I don't know, even attempting to write them down wrong, like even like, like the writing down process has nothing to do with the experience that inspired you to write it down, but you just sort of think like, well, I've enjoyed movies and I can't see myself doing anything. So this would be an interesting environment, or this would be like what I'd like to do because it seems like the most fun. Basically, it would seem like the most fun from the outset, as like a 9 to 5 or what like an actual career in movies from the outset would seem fun. But then as you understand it more and you realize it is just another business and all these other things, and you're faced with like, you know, maybe it's not, or maybe I can be a node in the process of making movies, which is a lot longer in realizing that. But I guess what made me want to do it, I guess just, I don't know, like it's hard to say. Like I remember being at university. You know what, I can tell you exactly, but it's not exactly normal. It's just like I was at first year university and I didn't enjoy what I was learning. I was accused of making up words. Like within the first month of the class, I used the word verisimilitude, and I didn't, you know, like, I mean, I knew how I was using it. I knew what it meant. It's like the appearance of reality or along those lines. And, you know, when you're that age, you're very sensitive. So if a teacher gives you like, you know, rubs you the wrong way and you're like realizing, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. So I just went to the library, the Elizabeth Dafoe Library at U of M. Now, this wasn't the same U of M that McLuhan went to. That was downtown, but this is like in Fort Garry. He actually did attend that campus in his last year in Winnipeg, because there was a guy in his carpool who lived to be 100. And I remember he's in one of the edits of the movie for a moment, the clipping about him, and they mentioned the lively conversations that they had on their way to the Fort Garry campus. Anyways, so I was at that campus, at the library there, and stumbled upon the film section. And that is what did it, because I was so anxious about wanting to know what I was going to do with my life in terms of how to actually have what was considered a career or make any money or like do anything that had to do with having an existence that seemed predicated on employment. And when I stumbled upon the film section, I mean, the context is that everything is, all context and nuance of discovery is lost now because of the internet. The homogenization of experience is lost, and it requires like catastrophic events for people to reflect. Like, let's say the entire world shutting down for, I don't know, some type of mishandling. Anyways, when I discovered that there was a section on film, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe this is here. Like, what did that mean? Did that mean that you could have a job like reviewing movies? Like, what was this for? I mean, they certainly didn't have production at U of M. U of M had like no money, so there's no film production course. So it was just film theory. But I just remember reading about. I read a lot about. I read one interpretation of persona being like the blank film and the projector going onto the blank film. That I love that, the one character to the other character. And then obviously Hitchcock became a favorite. After Hours by Scorsese became a favorite. This is 1990, so this is before like, you know, Natural Born Killers. And then like, you know, there's a magazine called Film Threats, and in 92 I heard about like Robert Rodriguez and Richard Linklater. So this is all before these things became, you know, de facto references. I remember when Tarantino was on Jay Leno and showed a clip from Reservoir Dogs, and it was just all about budget, and the thinking went from like film was $1,000 a minute to like Robert Rodriguez made the first version of El Mariachi for $5,000. So it's just kind of like, okay, well, I'll just get in the mix of that bullshit and see what kind of opportunities happen. And that was my motive. Like, it was just, and it was working. It was working. It was working. And then a couple tragic things happened with people that I knew. And then I went to Toronto, and not as tragic, but I basically got what I wanted. I shot a movie, finished editing it for free at the time. It was like, you know, it would have made its $8,000 of post-production back. I went to a place that had been doing music videos, because Toronto, I moved there because I would be able to get post-production gear that there just wasn't in Winnipeg, because there was an industry for every interest due to the population. And once I accomplished the goal, I sort of like gave up. Is like, I don't want to contribute to this. Last thing the world needs is another person's story. And then I came back to Winnipeg and got exposed to nonlinear digital video editing in spring of 1996. And that was the beginning of the end, in the sense like I knew what I wanted to do, or I knew what I would pursue. And the reason why I know that that's true is because of, obviously, Gerry, you know the importance of rhyme and truth. So do, pursue, true. And so nonlinear digital video editing became my life, and it got easier to do. People would ask, oh, you don't have permission to use this, and then fair use and understanding of fair use because of the story of the letter U in the numeral 2. So you see even more rhymes with negative land and U2. And what's that guy that lives in your area? Craig Baldwin. So all these things just kept happening and happening and happening and continue to happen. And eventually context itself as a commodity will be what the assembly line was like in the 1950s with Lucy and the candies. It's like anybody can do it. You're instantly a bourgeois person. You get put on the assembly line. All of a sudden you have a bourgeois life. We're seeing a little bit of it with social media. The residue is ending now, but basically anybody that has context itself will be turned into an NFT. If it leads to any sales, they'll get reputation capital and or commission. It will occur. It's the only new money that will happen. It's trillions of dollars.
Wow.
Long story short.
That was really thorough, though. As much as that was super cool. Now, a screenwriting teacher told me a great film or great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art or great film is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process?
I abhor talking heads and voiceover. Now, on occasion, yes, sure. Just for brevity's sake. But all the McLuhan work was I was not going to use voiceover. I was not going to use talking heads. I was going to go through all the effort of finding McLuhan saying for himself what needed to be said. And there was a documentary about Marlon Brando, I think, that came out like 3 years ago that kind of takes that tack and had a bit more money. So they did a post-production thing where they had a graphic representation of his head saying the words. So there was a cool sync job, but it was still based on cassettes. And so the intention has to be like the hieroglyph or like the Rosetta Stone, where it's like, here it is, it's cracked, and you perceive the 3 different languages, and given enough, and Clinton will like this, given a large enough beta test group, the solution will be obvious to someone, to quote the Cathedral and the Bazaar, I think quoting either Linus or the guy that wrote that essay himself, whose name escapes me in the moment. But you put it out there, and it's, that's where it's like, I don't care when someone understands. I know that it is understood before I even make it. When it gets understood eventually, that's immaterial. I just did what I did when I had to do it with the McLuhan stuff, because it had to be done that way, because so few people were doing it correctly and spinning so much of what he's what he said and what it means. Rather, let's just have him say it. Who wants to hear another person interpret it?
Right. We don't need the Media Ecology Association misinterpreting it again. Now, this was really good what you just said, but let's go back one step. Is what you were talking about effects precede causes?
Yeah.
What is, now in layperson's terms, what, when you try to explain effects precede causes to the normal person, they don't get it. What does it mean to you? How can you explain that? And you could do it again with that example, but just in basic, in a couple, short, brief. What does effects precede causes mean?
Okay, so the telegraph precedes the telephone, but the telegraph provides the environment for the telephone. Seurat is painting television 100 years before television. So the effects of the technology precede the appearance of the actual technology. In the same way that, like in my movie, I'm using Videosity as my example to show the context indexing in video leading to revenue before that becomes a main revenue generator in mainstream society. And
yeah,
the artist
you did.
is always, the artist is preceding the scientist, essentially.
Yeah, no, that was really well done. If clothing extends skin, knife and fork extends the teeth, what human sensorium is extended? What humanness is extended with video editing?
Memory, dream, the grammar of memory and dream. And by grammar, I mean specifically, we all sort of have enough of an understanding or enough memory of our experience with dreams to have this type of experience. You're in your dream and you pick something up in your dream proceeds, and then the need surfaces in your dream to use the thing that you picked up, but now it's not on your possession, and you go back and find it, and the environment's constantly slightly rearranging enough, and by the time you find it, you usually wake up soon thereafter. So I think it enhances the ability for me to even say that to you in a way that actually provides a service.
That was great, Richard. This is so fun. I've been wanting to do this for so many years, and it's just turning out beautifully. Peter Greenaway said, "Cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers." Let's just say any moving image art, cinema, video making, anything, that moving image is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. Are experimental filmmakers telling stories a different way or doing something completely different? Now, I know it's both and it depends, but Tony Conrad made an amazing film called The Flicker, and it's basically black and white frames just flickering black and white. And if you're epileptic, it'll put you in an epileptic fit. Now, the human can have a story go through their head watching the strobe effect for 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is. You can watch it on YouTube. But you get the essence of the question. I don't think Greenaway's dissing storytelling. He's just saying, why is moving image, the history of film's about 130 years old? Why has it been hijacked by narrative and storytelling? It's a moving image rich form, so there are some people, your film is definitely experimental film. Are they, let's just put it in they, are experimental filmmakers telling stories a different way or doing something different?
Well, okay, so here's how I will answer that. And by explaining that that's how I'm going to answer it before it's begun, in and of itself is both linear and nonlinear, and experimental and traditional. Peter Greenaway is one of the touchstones for me. There's a American Film Association, or AFI, which again I think in Los Angeles, the AFI, American Film Institute, had a magazine. And I believe in March 1991, Greenaway's Shakespearean Prospero's books came out.
Yes.
And he was one of the first people to use HDTV in Japan to do specifically nonlinear video editing. Now, the movie itself, obviously, you don't have to worry about it. It's Shakespeare interpreted by Peter Greenaway. And so it's not going to waste your time in any real way, but, and it was did some great stuff with the tools at the time that he was using. Very interesting stuff that we take for granted that will be a preset tomorrow called Peter Greenaway on like TikTok or whatever the next name is for, Napster, Seinfeld, whatever, Louis C.K. Whatever the little touchstone is for the zeitgeist of that second, that's going to come up. It's going to be a preset made by someone somewhere. And so the aesthetic element. So McLuhan, in my movie, I'm showing Finnegan's Wake, specifically the same page or near around the same page. Not that it says Mirachelle McMahon, but it says Lollapalooza. And
and I love that. Wait, Richard, Richard, wait 1 second. I went up to Perry Farrell. He lives right in my neighborhood. I went up to him at an art gallery once, and I says, "Dude, you know Lollapalooza is in Finnegan's Wake?" And he's like, "Wow." And I says, "Well,
I knew he wouldn't know. I knew he
no,
wouldn't
no,
know.
He's intelligent. He was sort of impressed, but it didn't matter because Lollapalooza came before Finnegan's Wake. Joyce didn't even make it up. I found out
No,
that
I know.
so go ahead. I just wanted to tell you that, but go ahead. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, in the MEA clip that I made before Pablo or Paulo said that I could show a version of the movie, I actually have peripheral used in some context as a reference, however slight, to Perry Farrell, which is obviously his name is a play on the word peripheral. So in that moment in the movie, and I think Winnipeg's McLuhan, definitely in Western Cynical edits, McLuhan is talking and he says, the aesthetic theory is in and itself a thing. So the experimental story is in and itself a story. Just like how, like, inevitably all the non-linear things that are happening linearly, even on a simultaneous awareness of it. The awareness of it being simultaneous is still a linear awareness of the idea of, let's say, the structure of simultaneity. So the storytelling and the updating, which, right now, if you go on Twitter, every single word is updated, every single interpretation is updated, usually for the benefit of a certain political party. But the point is that, like, the updating of storytelling in the context of Peter Greenaway saying, like, not necessarily that why has filmmaking been hijacked by storytellers? Well, I mean, what did McLuhan say? Like, the content of one medium is, the content of the new medium is always of the old. So, like, the content of, like, film was, like, theater, and etc. So, like, storytelling now, the most experimental film now compared to the storytelling of social media, which a generation from now will seem very traditional. The vertical consumption of TikTok videos. People, like, laugh where they say they and their wives or significant others or watch at least 30 minutes of TikTok videos. Now, I got onto TikTok when it was called Musical.ly, before it was sold to whichever company renamed it TikTok. And then I was on TikTok for a bit, and it does have a superior interface, but I realized, early on, I only lasted about 2 months on it. I was like, this is basically recess for the world. It's like when I was in grade 3 and we'd have recess at 10 a.m. This is that.
That is a quote. TikTok is recess. That's good.
Yeah.
And recess is good. That's what everybody wants. But what you're saying,
that's why it's so funny that it comes from
no,
China.
what you're saying is amazing, because I think it's not Peter, Hollis Frampton, or one of those guys, Andrew Noren, said filmmaking, it doesn't matter how abstract or experimental it is, it's one frame after another. So that is narrative, that is storytelling. So the hidden question, Richard, is storytelling more innate or more invented by humans?
Bit of both, because if they understand the medium, whether intuitively, accidentally, or intentionally, they realize that very same thing that you mentioned, that either Hollis Frampton, Peter Frampton, myself, or Peter Greenaway, or you said that no matter what, the playback is linear. That's why McLuhan said the most incredible thing was the instant replay.
Yes, boy, you hit all the tips. Okay, so now instant replay. So now when you're making your film, Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. Are you thinking of the audience while you're making the film?
Definitely. It took a bit to get to a point like Winnipeg's McLuhan, the greeted video. If you go to the channel, the moment, like, I showed it to my friend Jarrett, who was at the MEA. I think Jarrett and his significant other, whose name I forget in the moment, Jen. Great couple, amazing. Jen knows everything about, like, medieval literature. So I showed him, like, what I was going to show briefly, like, the day before, and I realized in that moment that without the captions, nobody's really going to know what's being said. And once I had the captions, I realized, okay, I finally have a form that works for this kind of experimental narrative. That the sort of, like, found objects juxtaposed in serendipitous and intentional ways, but then made into and refined. And the final sort of layer is the captioning of what's being said, as best as I can discern it myself. Because sometimes, you'd get these tapes and you'd have to do noise reduction because of whatever reason. Like I got an interview from Tom, whose name I forget, but Tom, the graduate student. He was a speaker at MEA. I think we were going to talk to him. Tom something or other. He interviewed McLuhan at his house. He wasn't sure the year, but the tapes were so old that they had to be really, really, really
Right.
figured out in order to know, and then captioned. And it's just like, to finally have a preset for a really raw method to turn it into something that could be consumable and could eventually become very, very mainstream. And in fact, is a really a style based on the necessity itself, where you're showing the components and you can experience them right, almost not very removed from how they were discovered. And that it's really just like the like a long, like what we're doing now, a long kind of nice conversation with Marshall McLuhan is what the whole idea was. And if I could get him talking about Winnipeg a little bit, then mission accomplished. And that took a long time because I was more or less working by myself because there was no structure. So the closest, Boonwell, I wanted to mention.
Yeah.
I rewatched The Phantom of Liberty, and I watched it with my dad. And there's a scene where they're sitting down to dinner, but instead of chairs, they're all sitting on toilets.
Yes.
And they take down their pants and then they escape to what would be normally the washroom, but it's not a washroom. It's like a little dinner room for one. And they have a little table that comes out of the wall and a little chair that comes out of the wall. And they're eating as if they were trying to be discreet because they're charming bourgeoisie, but they're eating in this little area. And my dad had never seen a movie like that. He's pretty much, a straight, normal, square kind of fella.
Right.
And for him to see Boonwell at his most experimental and high at his top of his peak of his game, end of his career, but at the most powerful point of his career. And I was recently I've been kind of branching out of some McLuhan stuff and working on, what's David Lynch's next project going to be and how is it going to relate to Twin Peaks? And I got a little bit about him talking about Inland Empire and how he did the editing on that using Final Cut Pro in his office at home. And it took 6 months. And he said there was no story. The story came out of the editing because it's just a bunch of feelings, a bunch of serendipity. And I think that's really, if you have money, sure, you can plan things. But if you're doing it by yourself and you're doing it because, like McLuhan would say, the whole point of Descent into the Maelstrom is pattern recognition and that we need art as a means of survival. Well, yeah, that's, that's been the story of my life for the last, since 2015. I left a job at UPS that I had for 12 years and got lucky and got some money to do this because there's local programming from all the Canadian provinces. They have to put 2% of their budget to local programming or they have to give it to Ottawa. And so, no one had tried to do one about McLuhan specifically about Winnipeg. I mean, people tried, but I mean, it's just going to be people talking. It's going to be people that aren't McLuhan talking.
Yeah.
It's like, throw a rock and you'll hit another one.
Right. No, dude, you did it well. And I do recommend people just go to McLuhan Videos on YouTube, the channel, and you can see all these clips and all these films that you made. So, Richard, onward. What was the motive of the cave artist? Just your hunch, not what Herzog said or anthropologists. What's your hunch?
That's, I think, the same motive. That's, I think, I don't think that's changed. And I think it kind of relates to prayer, but not in a formal way. And it's you're so motivated, you're so touched by a feeling that you have to have some type of expression outside of your immediate faculties. And so, you know, because you threw in not basically saying not what people are saying, but I do like some of the notions that it was a signal or a symbol for survival, literally art as survival. If you want to look at it like, if you're going to draw this buffalo, it's to draw buffalo to you.
Wow. That is really good because it leads perfectly into this. George Manupelli started the Ann Arbor Film Festival 60 years ago. And he said his mantra was ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. Cecil Taylor, jazz pianist, says I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making? Of course, it's both and it depends, but is art making, filmmaking, more self-expression or more vehicles for whatever dominant technology or culture is present?
Well, again, I'll agree that we're antennas there, that we're conduits shaping what's already there. We're painting the invisible, so to speak.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's really what it is. Like, we are painting the invisible, whether we're using a tool or whether we're just painting the invisible, air painting the invisible, like air guitar, but air painting the invisible, you know, like moving your hand in a certain way.
Who came
All
up with
these things.
that? Richard,
Which one?
who came up with we're painting the invisible?
Painting the invisible is, I mean, I did come up with that, but where it came from, why I came up with it, and when I searched on the internet one time who else did it, there was like some religious person, a female Christian singer, also had this phrase.
Wow.
But we know that like pretty much everything that everybody's done all the time, because it's on a frequency, that it's like a rush to, you know, Kafka town. It's a rush to let the trial begin so the bumbling bureaucrats of bullshit can at least give me that timestamp, which is why the blockchain and babbling brooks of bullshit all begin with B. But, you know, uppercase B, lowercase or build back better is obviously. Anyways, painting the invisible comes from a Spider-Man episode, from the 60s Spider-Man episode. He leads this villain, I believe his name is Dr. Noah Body, to a candy factory in order to finally figure out who he is. He like gets candy spray. He lures Dr. Noah Body in and sprays like ice cream on him, and then thus revealing his shape because he was invisible. So I turned that into like metadata and the involuntary data, and how like we're all creating these kind of like psychological dossiers just by existing on these networks, and we're painting the invisible in a way. But yeah, painting the invisible is just like, you know, the notion, the acceptance of dimensions and simultaneity, or as being there.
Super cool, dude. I'm going to use that, if you don't mind, in my papers and writing. That is very good. Is perception reality?
Yes.
Wait, we got to go back one more. Can art making be egoless?
I don't think so, because inevitably it was made by whomever decided to begin to try to make what was already there but needed some kind of form. So the form, the residue left over between the inspiration and the creation is the ego.
Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength. We're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Richard, please tell me a weakness that you've turned into a strength.
I guess general acceptance of reality as far as I can understand it, and appreciating it and turning it on its head by saying that I would be an aggravation connoisseur. And so if things don't necessarily go how I thought they might or should, I can at least still marvel in the design of how it didn't go well and find like a joy in that, and then, you know, learn from it and understand myself better through that process. And I think that's what we're all striving to do over and over, is just understand what we're doing as we're doing it better and better, knowing that it's impossible to fully comprehend it. That, you know, we're trying to live life forwards, knowing that it can only be understood backwards, faster and faster and faster and faster.
Wow, that was good. That's like epitome of turn a breakdown into a breakthrough, turn a rejection into a redirection. You know, my favorite is Iggy's band. He said was so bad at imitating the Rolling Stones they invented punk.
Yeah, yeah, he's a huge influence, because it's like,
Yeah,
I was in a band, and our singer wasn't a great singer, but the whole idea of McLuhan's idea of just like, if you commit to the idea,
yeah,
commitment is total. So it
yeah.
doesn't matter. Because once you're committed, you're committed. It doesn't matter if today it didn't work out. Well, guess what? There's tomorrow.
You know, I have a question that started my whole interviewing career 40 years ago. I'm not even going to ask it because you just answered it beautifully. Okay, the next question is, tell me one major element of your filmmaking, your video making, that's changed and one that stayed the same since you started making your amazing videos. One major element that stayed the same, one major element that's changed.
Well, I can answer the changed element was realizing that captions made it consumable. That, you know, I relented and participated in the system, and I respect the system and the need to consume and the need to have structure, and that was all realized via putting captions on. So that's what changed. What stayed the same was just, oh yeah, what stayed the same was realizing, like, for what I'm doing, is that the best way to try to get an added level of meaning to me, for me, when referencing material, specifically with McLuhan, since so much of it is like rooted in print, that to seek out the original objects and then take them to where, like I am right now, like Assiniboine Park or anywhere, take the object, take my iPhone 6S at the time, and film hurtling the object as high as I could hurtle it in slow motion, and then playing it backwards while McLuhan's talking about what he's talking about, which is incorporated in the object that's actually being shown at the time. So better understanding of how to incorporate natural serendipity, but designed serendipity, is what it made me understand that there was really a thing of sort of design serendipity in the context of making an experimental film, which really isn't experimental at all once you do it. Like, and even I'll end it on this. McLuhan is talking again with Sutton, and they're talking about Sam Butler and Erewhon. And McLuhan says that Butler was the first one to realize that the evolution of man was actually extended into these technological contexts. And Sutton says to him, well, that's extensions of man. It's easy. It's very understandable. And McLuhan says, well, yeah, it's incredibly understandable once you've done all this work, isn't it? and so, yeah, it was like, it's like, if you do something crazy, or what seems crazy, enough times, it's no longer crazy, and it reveals itself just like everything else. It becomes routine, just like anything else. It has the characteristics. You anticipate them. It becomes predictable, even if it's on the surface to like an ordinary person, you know, the craziest thing they've ever encountered. But that's just because they've not sought out extensive range in whatever kind of art they've been consuming, specifically video or motion art. They have a very, you know, most people are very content to just have passive consumption of, in this case, streaming services and or vertical popular posts. I mean, it's,
Yep.
you know, but,
So-
but the popular posts are can be crazy, but yeah.
Richard, that was brilliant. Now I asked for 90 minutes. Can you go another 10, 20, or 30?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So two things. Captions made consumable. Ask me sometime about the whole story of Mary Ellen Butte, who helped invent electronic abstract animation and made her first feature called Passages from Finnegan's Wake. Exact same thing. She learned that she had to make the captions on the film to make it consumable. So you really had a parallel story going there. The other one was design serendipity reminds me of the line, I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity. So how do you find peace of mind?
Sort of am thinking about like the next, always like the next kind of like, you know, few weeks, just peace of mind, like just thinking about the people who mean something to me and making sure that like our relationships and stuff are on a good level, and you know, like just maintaining a thought about those who have, you know, been in my life, even if I don't see them often, just like you know, when the thought occurs to me, you know, thinking about them for a moment, you know, and stuff like that, and then like being thankful to be able to, you know, do what I'm doing, you know, whatever it is, and just for the opportunity to even be bored, you know, like, yeah, not that I am bored, but like just even for the opportunity of not to know what to do next, you know, like that.
Oh,
That's how I.
That is a great thing. How do you find peace of mind? By knowing that I can be comfortable with being bored and not knowing what's going to come next. That is a good answer, because you know, all artists strive to not know, to act like a child, but all we do is keep adding up more info and data to think we're going to get better, when you should, everything you know is wrong, and erase it all and unlearn. Sometimes, you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
I do.
Okay, so these are 5 quickie Alan Watts questions, just within 3 to 5 words. Who started it all?
um who started it all? Some teacher somewhere.
Are we going to make it?
Oh yeah.
Where do we put it?
Where it is.
Who's cleaning it up?
Self-contained.
Is it serious?
Oh yeah.
Way to go. So I'm going to ask you one more, then we'll bring in Clinton. And this is Joseph Boyce saying years ago, make the secrets productive. Lou Welsh said, guard the secrets, constantly reveal them. But Thornton Wilder nailed it. 1928, he said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. Richard, you've laid your cards out on the table for 90 minutes. I'm grateful. I don't insinuate you haven't answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
Well, Thornton Wilder, I think, like Shadow of a Doubt, was based on a short by Thornton Wilder. It's an Alfred Hitchcock movie, very dark movie. And yeah, it has that kind of like template of like what's on the surface, and then what's below the surface. We have, like, you know, the beginning of Blue Velvet with the amplification of the ants at work. So how does that all relate? And how does that relate to me? I'll say this. I strive to try and be as close to how I am in the online and the offline world. And, you know, you're revealing and you're concealing, and that's limited by the, you know, the language that we have is in and of itself a booby trap. It can't possibly express everything explicitly. and poetry serves that function. And then the richness of a conversation like this, the richness of, the only difference being by not being on video right now, so involuntary body language, my own was not there. But I mean, just the honesty of honesty, like, you reveal as much, as you can reveal, like there's going to be constraints to all expression. And I am not someone that really wants to try and come across differently than I actually am. But at the same time, I don't want to just like, completely just be irresponsible with my honesty. So for what we're talking about, completely 100% true. Like, what's it all about? Is it serious? My answer was, oh yeah, it is serious. But again, etymology and translator is trader, that we can only do as much conscious good and the least conscious bad, and that's all we can do. And that's all I can try to do. And that's it, knowing that he or she who laughs last is the main strategy. So to cultivate a sense of humor about yourself, but it's not all laugh, but in and of itself, that's funny, even if it isn't all funny.
Yeah, that was good, Richard. There was so much there. Okay, Clinton, get your butt in here, man. We need you now. But before Clinton jumps in, and it really worked out that your picture wasn't there. I felt your presence completely. One question before Clinton's is, on what occasion do you lie, Richard?
Well, very few, but if I had to, I would. Like, if it was something that I absolutely felt it was the best thing to do, and I don't think it's the best thing to do, because lying is so much more complicated than being truthful. So that's why I avoid it, because I'm egotistical enough to not want to give away my energy to maintain the lie to those that are protected by it. But at the same time, on occasions, usually very serious ones, you might have to lie. But so few things are mercifully that serious that you actually have to lie. So 90% of the time, tell the truth, but 10% of the time, you might have to lie.
Yeah. Clinton, I know you've been itching. This is a good one, eh?
Oh, man. Yeah. Bouncing off the walls here. Yeah, it's fantastic. I love how your whole idea of whatever gets done is just going to become a preset on the next app that everyone is going to flick on and use, and is going to become, say, like a trend for 2 months until it grows stale, right? Like, all these people living on the threshold of what their easy to use app can do for them this week, and then can do for them next week, and they're living 5, 10, 15 years behind people who are running into the technology. Like, is like how it's like a shearing going on of the people who are living at the at the cusp of the content, who are excited by the hot new thing, and the people who were doing that 15 years ago, back when it was hard and original, and they were they look like idiots doing it. Do we need to close that shearing? Is it okay the way that is? Like, do we need to close the human scale around those two poles, or are we happy drifting? Like, is everything fine continuing this this sort of difference or disparity in perception?
I don't think we have to like close it off, because I don't think it's possible. But it's like that cliche to archetype, where like old cliche becomes new archetype, and the archetype eventually becomes cliche, and that it's this ongoing thing. And how like someone who's got the preset now of something like natural VHS artifacting back then was something that made you actually wince, like when you had to experience it, especially if you were like transferring it from one VHS to like, oh my goodness, in the mid 90s, you're actually digitizing it, but there were some tracking issues. And then now that's become like a narrative construct. And that's what's interesting, is that it becomes this go-to. And even in the mid 90s, you'd put on a CD and have the sound of vinyl crackling. So it had like the classic, every obsolete technology becomes an art form and becomes again, a narrative construct, a very traditional narrative construct, but stemming out of a complete, not even a very unconscious byproduct of the work itself,
Yeah. It becomes an aesthetic at that point. It drives me crazy when I see some high definition 16:9 video that someone threw a VHS filter onto to make it look like a VCR is going out of tracking, and it's like that would have never, right?
Or distress genes. I mean, it's like, to me, it's all just trying to give across. And tell me if you get this, Clinton, because I mean, you're especially astute on these things. The prevalence of what I'm just calling screen scale requires this, because the human scale inside the screen scale, the only precedent for it is dreams and hallucinations. So any kind of like instant experience, whether it's distress genes, a VHS filter, gives it this, McLuhan would say, like, the journey, the guy running with the message was more important than the message, like, rather than getting the same message from the telephone, if you actually had a courier like Achilles or whatever running with the message, or like, you're in the room we're in right now, if it suddenly dropped by 40 degrees, everything we're saying would have an incredibly much different meaning, even if it was a transcription of the exact same conversation. So that's unavoidable, but I understand exactly what you mean by just the surplus ubiquity and the almost instinctive feeling of, I'm even guilty of it. Like, I just happened to get on with some of that stuff before it became like super even easier to do. But it's just funny to see like the timestamp of like, like the mid 90s, getting your photographs processed in the digital date readout on the VHS. It's just kind of like, do they know like what is being expressed there, other than the novelty of how it appears? And then what does that mean for those, like, is it just childhood? Is it just childhood? Is it like just the earliest object childhood memory of like recording a VHS, playing it back at the age of like 4, or like whenever it's all about leaving the analog, but it's like this analog memory nostalgia thing. Like, the nostalgia thing is really how it manifests in technology is kind of fascinating, because it suggests an experience, it suggests human scale inside a screen scale, and that's just going to become, once we're in Ready Player One world, even weirder.
One of my favorite bloggers said that the surest sign that someone is living in the Matrix is when they look at a representation of something, or a representation or a recreation of something that happened or existed before they were born, and their first thought is, "Wow, that's so authentic."
Yeah, but I mean, it's like, it's genuinely like this, like it's almost psychic. It's like the evolution of psychic representation, whereas before it would be in our mind's eye, and now it's in a sort of pixel version of an experience that hasn't happened for the observer. If the person who thinks that it's authentic, they don't have that memory, and so it's like a reconstruction of a memory, which again brings it to like, this is a very unusual, but it also creates the sort of hipster aesthetic where they're going to seek it out. They're going to find that hardware. If that becomes their life's goal, it's like that movie from the early 80s, The Gods Must Be Crazy.
Coke bottle.
Yeah. So it's like, it becomes that for now. It's not just a Coke bottle. it's jeans, it's VHS, it's every single artifact that has some kind of, that is in and of itself a narrative construct. Just by the artifact itself is a story, obviously. But like now, it's like instead of it being a cave painting or the Rosetta Stone, it's the acronym, Fox Morning Television, WOC, for with original commercials, because now the commercials become the rarest part, because they never thought about putting the commercials out on a streaming service. You're not going to get like, Netflix has like, November 27th, 1983, ABC affiliate in Louisiana's commercials minus the content between them as something to consume, as in like just added to the streaming service alongside the $17 billion that they're using for original content, which is just nobody, I'll just say this. One time I was planting trees and somebody had a cassette of the Division Bell by Pink Floyd. Now, I mean, I like Syd Barrett, and I mean, I was never taken in by Pink Floyd, and I understand The Wizard of Oz and The Dark Side of the Moon and the notion of pretty much synchronization. Well, any two objects that have any kind of affinity, when you play them at the same time, if they were not created to be played at the same time, will have synchronistic linguistics, as Bob in the Paranoia issue used that phrase. But the point is that I found that cassette in someone's car, not inside the cassette jacket, and we were on a break. I took it out of the car and I threw it into the woods. And I said, I've just made that album better.
Man, Richard, you hit that's the Chewy Caramel Center. Everything you said, I agree with totally. But I wanted to go back 1 second, tell you a quick, stay on. Clinton can still go, but David Lee Roth said, "Here today, gone later today," and I think I get a kick out of that one. But it is what you guys were just talking about. How does that differ, or is the same as McLuhan calling things the new nature?
Yeah, well, that's what it is, because of the screen scale element subsuming the traditional human scale element, where the screen scale becomes the new human scale. That's what's sort of like scary and not scary. I mean, we are, I don't think, scared, because we are creating a conversation in which I myself am getting enlightenment on something where, yeah, that is what's happening. Screen scale has become human scale. The only precedent for understanding that is dreams and hallucinations. So not exactly, the academics don't really have, like, nobody's got a monopoly. There is no racket that has a monopoly on the linguistic element or the grammar inside screen scale as human scale. Mm-hmm. It's emerging with the anecdote of, like, the blogger saying, like, someone observing something that happened before they were born as authentic. But I don't think that's the whole story. The whole story is that, like, at least they can seek it out in real life and then put a QR code on it. I mean, like, the thing that I've realized is that, like, once the world opens up again, I have a feeling, and this happened, you see it with the GameStop sort of story narrative, is that so much, and we touched on this, Gerry, but I forget mentioning it, but it was kind of like, what pleases you and how much do you learn, or do you learn from what pleases you? That dynamic. And what I get from that is that when a kid goes to GameStop and they have that embryonic experience, like I remember being 5 years old at the North Star Cinema in Winnipeg on Portage Avenue when I saw Star Wars, in 1977. And so I have a few visual memories of after the movie, like when the lights first came up and being close to the floor and my relationship to the seats and stuff like that. Like, like not exactly things to do with the movie itself, but like with original commercials was my perspective of the movie floor and the movie seats. And I can tell you which direction I was looking in and all that stuff. So that's that embryonic emotional experience. And so with GameStop still so there, palpable, and they can comprehend enough through all those like countless hours spent on Reddit to realize, okay, so if I use what little money I have to buy this stock that is like currently $30 or $20 because they think it's going to go under, and just buy it for the sake of buying it because it means something intangible to me, and if we hold on to that, something will happen. That's one sort of example of it. But I think in the future, the stores will come back because of the serendipity of how the content is arranged. There was a store in Hollywood and Vermont called Mondo Video A Go-Go, and next to it was Amok Books. And those places were crazy, and you cannot get the experience of what the content was on any streaming service. But if you put a QR code on everything and each store becomes its own streaming service, and then the large companies eventually co-opt it once they see the model, that's what I think will happen more and more, is you'll see this sort of like augmented reality and virtual reality constantly sort of ping-ponging between each other. And it'll be sort of like, not exactly as Spielbergian as Ready Player One, even though he didn't write that book, but it's not going to be like, a shanty town in Seattle. Well, maybe Seattle, but it's going to be a shanty town in Texas where everyone just plays virtual reality all the time. That's all their life is. And then at the end, once they win the game, they're like, be close to the person you love because they're a person, that kind of like simplistic morality. But that is going to be normal human scale, is going to be finding that human scale inside the screen scale environment. That brings us back to Sam Butler and the technology being the main mode of evolution, because it truly, obviously, is an extension, and the only way we're going to understand our unconscious by constantly revealing it to ourselves through the sheer universal mountain ranges of content we're constantly having to wade through. And the only way we can not get quicksand into it is by pattern recognition. I mean, I can't tell you the last time I even read an article online. But when I used to, it would be like headline, last paragraph, and then read it backwards until, if it was worth actually getting to the first line. And it almost never was. And now nobody reads any of that stuff. It's just like, they're bad. No, they're bad.
No, Richard, here's what you do, and Clinton knows this. Do a tutorial, a 6-minute or 4-minute tutorial on McLuhan Unclaimed, and put it up. And then this is, it's all about, people do reviews of other people's things, and it's like Cliff Notes. So that's how I consume things now. But, Bo Burnham's new Netflix comedy special, Inside, is brilliant in a lot of ways, super experimental. But the way I consumed it is I watched a guy say, here's the 6 things of why this is good in 6 minutes, rather than watching the whole 90 minutes. And
That's
then I eventually watched the whole 90 minutes, but you know what I'm saying. Okay, Clinton, go ahead. Sorry I hijacked that. Is that another one?
Oh no, yeah, that's fine. It's just going off what you said there, Richard. It reminds me of there was an essay by one of those. It was either Timothy Leary or Terrence McKenna, but one of those guys like, here's what virtual reality is going to be like for your kid. They're writing this like 1991 or something. It's like your kid is going to go for tennis lessons in Hawaii in the goggles. Then they're going to go through a point and click menu, and suddenly they're going to be at their French lessons in Paris. And then to hang out with their friends, they're going to go to Switzerland for a 15-minute recess in Switzerland before going back to France, right? And then they're going to go to a squash game in Guatemala. And it was really married to this idea that like augmented reality means, oh yeah, all the places you can go in virtual reality are real places where you do the things you would do in reality, but now you're wearing goggles, man, right?
Yeah, and I think like that's anticlimactically what's going to happen. And then the thing that will come out of that will be the seekers who actually try to go to Switzerland or try to go to any of the places that they visited countless times, and then they have this idea of like, how close is it to my experience? And there'll be some movie where it'll be like, this is exactly what it was like when I was just in my basement. But now I'm here, and the tactility is this one little infinitesimal detail that can't be digitized, and that's the portal to authenticity. And then there's a sequel. There's something, something.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, I've recreated the interior of this Volkswagen 100 times in my CAD program, and now I finally found one, and I can sit in the Volkswagen and be able to scratch the pleather.
Yeah, well, it's the tactility that can't be digitized. But they'll try, like they'll try to get like, scents and stuff like that, imitating Epcot and John Waters and Buckminster Fuller and all these things to try to like obtain all the tactility. And you can't blame anybody for doing it. That is what'll happen. But I'm just thinking like, with the reaction videos or the tutorials, that's kind of like this slow splitting of the atom for like all that unconscious body language to be algorithmically misinterpreted for several generations until there's like that computerization self-awareness event. Not quite sentience, but ant level sentience that I don't know. I mean, like that's always the big that's the big asymptote gap between truth and speculation, that as it gets infinitesimally smaller, where like a strand of hair is like, enormous, but it just keeps, you never can, for whatever reason, if it's like faith or some sort of thing where it's like you have to meet halfway between 0 and 1, and it's just too hard at scale. And eventually it happens. But by the time it happens, by the time you get what you wish for, the motive for the wish is completely so forgotten that you're almost at 0.
Why did I spend the last 5 years pursuing this?
Well, but imagine that at scale.
You go back in your journals, like, why? Did I write down my reasons to start this?
I'm just saying. So you imagine that though at scale on this planet, where we all get, this last chapter of the westernization of the globe. There's always been globe culture, but now it's just been westernized, and the unwesternization of the westernization. And it's like, oh right, maybe that's why it got westernized. And it's just all these like massive voyages to go back to something we already knew. But you can't go any other way.
It's so authentic, man. It's exactly what the Pilgrims were about. Shoot.
Yeah. Well, that's So then it's just like, do we have like malls in space just so we don't have earthbound bias for a moment, just to get that one little bit of agreement among the irresistible force, the immovable object? And then that becomes like, oh yeah, so you both agree you're pissing. Okay.
Well, anyways, gentlemen, let's wrap it up now, and we'll definitely get you back here, Richard, for a McLuhan mashup, so Clinton can be present the whole time. But this was really fun. So, just in closing, Richard, last question is: what gives you the most optimism?
Shared aggravation, but on like an individual level, without any confirmation that anybody else was aggravated.
That was a good answer. Richard, it's been a pleasure and an honor. Clinton, thank you so much.
Goodbye.
You both to you as well. Thanks again, Clinton. Thanks again, Gerry.